Without further ado, why don't we give him a warm welcome this morning, Dr. Henry Mohn.
Good morning! Okay, that wasn't too bad. I remember once I was, I senior pastored or lead pastored. Yeah, it's a little loud, sorry, and I'm making a mess. I might need another stand, I don't know. 2 different churches, but honestly, that's not my passion, and I really didn't feel that that's what God had called me to. And I remember I was serving as the children's pastor in a large church. I think it was in Alabama because I've been on staff at several. Church of about 1,500 down there. And one of the ladies in the church came to me one day and she said, you know, Pastor Henry, when are you going to be a lead pastor? Because the mentality is it's a stepping stone. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I was a lead pastor. I was a senior pastor. That's not what God called me to. God called me to minister to children, and you've got to do what God has called you to do. I had another lady, and I said, man, if your class starts at 12:15, I got to go fast here. That came to me once in a church in Waukegan, Illinois. And she said, Pastor Mohn, if you are ever scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that's the word she used, for workers, for children, let me know, and I'll come and help you. And as nicely as I could, I looked at her and I said, I will never scrape the bottom of the barrel for children's workers. I don't want people that are there that don't have a passion for children. I would rather have fewer workers that have a passion for kids than to have the place filled with people that are just there because somebody's got to do it. And if you can't tell, I'm a pretty enthusiastic person. I love doing the things that God has called me to do. So we're going to try this. I've never used this before. Hopefully, because on my, there we go. Okay. If you, we now, and if you read the back of your bulletin, you'll see that we've done all, I read that and I'm going, wow, that sounds really impressive, you know, whatever. But if you come to our store on Washington Island, God has permitted us, it's kind of our semi-retirement, if you will, now. And my wife is Sue. Her dad called her Susie. And so she is Susie, and it's Susie Sweets. And I greet people, and I'm the cashier, and I love doing it. You know, I know I'm shy, but it just happens. But you will see, and this isn't the picture that's above the fireplace in our store, but this is the words, okay? This is 8 of our kids. Now, this picture's kind of old because the youngest one there is now 14, okay? She's sitting back there someplace, but this is what it says. 100 years from now, it will not matter what kind of car I drove, what kind of house I lived in, how much money was in my bank account, nor what my clothes looked like. But the world may be a better place because I was important in the life of a child. I have preached lots and lots of funerals in my life. First funeral I ever preached, I was pastoring a church in Gregory, South Dakota, and it was for a 23-month-old little girl whose mom had beat her to death. Mom got 8 years, served 4 of them in prison. There was hardly anybody there, to be quite honest. I think the dad and uncle and the grandparents. One of the hardest things I ever did, I remember the undertaker telling me, Emmett Cotterba, I'm horrible with remembering names. If I remember a name from 34 years ago, because she was the same age as our oldest son, who was almost 36, there's significance. Emmett Cotterba, the undertaker, told me, he said, Pastor Mohn, if you can do this, you can do anything. You'll get through this. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I preached funerals for people that were old and filthy rich and others that were poor. And you know what's interesting? Not a single time have I ever heard anybody say, wow, did you see the car this guy used to drive? Or the house. Honestly, what I've seen the most when they had lots of stuff is kids fighting over things that when they're dead aren't going to make a difference either. But you know what? Nobody cares. The last funeral I did was for, it's been 2-3 years ago, was for a lady that was the secretary, receptionist, whatever, in a high school in Urbana, Illinois, and everybody loved her. She wasn't rich. She wasn't whatever, but she was nice. Everybody loved her. So, kids. And I'm going to be honest. I told Pastor Jonathan, I said, forgive me, I may step on some toes today, but truthfully, this isn't my numbers. This is what comes from the Bible. This is what comes George Barna. If you're not familiar with George Barna, I love the work of George Barna. I've heard him speak personally in the church in California. I was on staff at a church of 5,000 in California. We had over 1,300 kids. Our last VBS, we had over 1,100 kids there in one day alone. We would do trunk or treat. We'd have over 3,000 people show up. I mean, it was incredible. We were only there for 2.5 years because that's, first of all, California, we won't even go there. But it's kids and connecting kids is so critical. So why do we need to connect kids to Christ? Now, in your bulletin there, you got my notes, and you'll see lots of blanks, and they're all underlined there. And I know a lot of you probably won't fill them out, but if you're that person that loves to, because see, I'm that person, I love to research things, and I love to put things in there, and I've only got a few minutes left, so I got to get going here. But why do we need to connect kids to Christ? Well, I got all kinds of things here. The Family Council, Family Life Council says it's time to bring the family back to life. This is a quote. And I've got the websites and stuff on there, so it's all documented if you're interested. But in the course of researching family life in America, the Southern Baptist Council on Family Life uncovered such gut-wrenching statistics that they were driven to their knees. This is what they came up with. 88% of the children raised in evangelical homes leave church at the age of 18, never to return. 88%. The divorce ratio among members of evangelical churches is virtually the same as among non-church members. In the United States, 1 million children see their parents divorce. Approximately 2/3 of the members of the Southern Baptist churches, and this is the group that did this study, attend church only sporadically. Personal bankruptcies are at an all-time high in America. The majority of children in America have less than 10 minutes of significant and meaningful conversation with their parents each week. Not each day, each week. If you remove the mother, you can measure the statistic in seconds. There's a problem. Jesus understood the value of reaching and mentoring children and youth. Now, we're going to basically focus on children today. And again, we'll get into some statistics, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But I don't want you to think that I am negating ministry to youth. We reach them as children, we disciple them as youth. And if we don't do those things, then we've lost them. In fact, and I don't have this in your notes, but I sat on the Special Needs Adoption Council for the state of Wisconsin for many, many years. Child Protective Services for Winnebago County, that council for many years. By the age of 3 years old, the vast majority, and I want to say it's around 97%. I'd have to go look at to make sure. But of the synaptic connections in the brain are developed by the age of 3. If children are not raised in a loving home where they are touched a lot, where they are loved on a lot, where they are valued by the age of 3, it is very, very, very difficult to reprogram the brain. This is so critical. And Jesus understood the value. This is what he says. It says he called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them. Matthew 18, 2-6. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Whoa. That's Jesus saying this. Okay? I actually, before I did my master's in education, I thought about doing a master's in social work. And we were talking with our social worker one day, Pat Landcore, who later went on to become the state director for foster care. She was the regional director at the time. And I said, Pat, I'm thinking about doing a master's in social work and becoming a social worker to work with kids. And she said, Henry, you don't want to do that. I said, why not? She said, and I would never do this, but this is her words. She said, because you would walk into some of these homes and see what these people have done to the kids, and you'd want to hurt somebody. And it wouldn't be the kids. And that's Jesus saying, listen, you hurt one of these kids, better to be thrown into the sea and drown. That's Jesus' words. That's not my words. Okay? He goes on in Mark 10:13 through 16. We see the words, people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. But the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter into it. And he took the children in his arms, and he placed his hands on them, and he blessed them. Now, what's interesting is this. How many of you have ever seen, probably not in real life, but replications of The Last Supper, the painting? Oh, come on, you've seen that. Sure. And forgive me, my mouth gets dry. In the paintings that we see of the disciples, they look like they're about the same age as Jesus. But in reality, that probably is not the truth. Jesus' disciples were probably mostly teenagers. And we know that from historical fact. We know that from the culture of the Jews. How old were the disciples? Rick Thiessen says this. So in the time of Jesus, almost all Jewish men were married, and usually by the age of 18. Okay? That's their culture. Girls were even younger. But in the Gospels, Peter is the only disciple known to have been married. We see that in Matthew chapter 8. No other disciples' wives are ever mentioned. So this tells us that the disciples may have all been under, and probably were, 20, with some of them as young as 15 years old. Okay? Because at 15 years old, that's when they were sent out. They were men in their culture. They were out fishing. They were out doing the things that men did. And by the age of 18, almost every male was married. No more than 20 years old. So that tells us that the vast majority, if not all of them, but maybe Peter, and he may have been 18, 19, we don't know, were teenagers. That's when Jesus is calling them. That's when Jesus is training them. Because quite honestly, if we look again at their culture, others that would have gone on to become disciples of various leaders would have already been those disciples by the time they're 18, 19 at the oldest. So we know that. The secular world understands the value of children and reaching children. These statistics are somewhat scary, and some of these are actually old, so the numbers are even higher now. But this is the most current I was able to find. This is a statistic from 2007. In 1983, companies spent $100 million marketing to kids. Today, now keep in mind, this is in 2007. It's even higher today, I can almost guarantee you, but it's hard to find the numbers. Today, they're spending nearly $17 billion every year to reach your kids. And we're not talking just teenagers. We're talking kids. Okay? It's incredible. Marketing firms and advertisers are looking to a younger demographic, increasingly targeting tweens and even younger children. It's happening. Kids have huge control over the flow of parents' spending. Statistics show that 8 to 12-year-olds spend $30 billion of their own money each year. It's like, where do they get that kind of money? And they influence another $150 billion of their parents' spending. You don't think that the world understands the value of hooking kids on their products? Big time. How many of you, I'm just curious, maybe you don't, but how many of you use the same toothpaste today that you used when you were a kid? I don't know, do you? Anybody? Everybody? I don't. You do or don't? You do. Yeah. You know what? You get them as kids. Hook them on Mountain Dew. Nasty stuff. I didn't drink it when I was a kid, okay? I drink water. I don't drink much anything else, okay? But get them hooked on Mountain Dew and they're on Mountain Dew for the rest of their life until they die at age 32 or whatever, So, hey, research shows that spiritual maturity process should start at a young age. George Barna. Like I said, I love the work of George Barna, and he's recently come out with even more current statistics. George Barna has done research that shows 4 critical outcomes. First of all, a person's moral foundations are generally in place by the time they reach the age of 9. The moral foundation by the age of 9 years old. Number 2, a person's response to the meaning and personal value of Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection is usually determined before a person reaches 18 years old. So the moral foundation's there by the age of 9. By the age of 18, the meaning and the personal value of Jesus and what he did for us is in place by the age of 18. Data indicates that in most cases, people's spiritual beliefs are irrevocably formed when they are pre-teens. So by the age of 12, at the latest, the spiritual beliefs are there. Adult church leaders usually have serious involvement in church life and training when they are young. Your music pastor and I were talking about Pastor Scott, right? Because I'm horrible with names. I told you that. Emmett Cotter, So anyway, we were talking about this yesterday. He grew up in the church, left church, and everybody, I think, for a long time, but he came back. Because the moral foundation, the things were there. George Barna's research discovered the probability of someone accepting Jesus as his or her Savior. Now this to me is just wow. 32% of those between ages 5 and 12. Statistically, 32% of kids between the ages of 5 and 12 will accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. I was sharing with several different people, but your pastor as well, and my daughter knows this because I've shared it, I think, many times. But at the age of 9 years old, my father was a pastor. I grew up as a preacher's kid, but he was not pastoring at this time. Elmer Royer, again, remember, this is a long time ago. Elmer Royer was the pastor of a church in Gibson City, Illinois, that we were attending at the time before my father went back into full-time ministry. And I remember at the age of 9-year-old in a Sunday evening service, going to the altar and crying like a baby because I just thought I was the worst sinner in the world, and asking God to forgive me and making a commitment to serve him the rest of my life. And I have. As a teenager, I honored and served God. I'm not saying I didn't make mistakes, that I didn't whatever, but I'm telling you, I honored and served God. My wife and I met at Bible college, got married when we were 19 years old. Yeah, we were young. And you know what? We've been married 38 and a half years, and this is honest to goodness. We've never yelled or screamed at each other. We've never cursed each other. In fact, we don't use slang in our house, period. Are there disagreements at times? Do we have to work through things? Yes. But we made a commitment, and so did she as a child. We're going to honor and serve God. And I grew up as a preacher's kid. Did all of my siblings follow that path? No, unfortunately. But most of them did, all but one. You know what? 32%. I said, I miss, and I'm just going to be honest with you, I miss altars and altar calls. For kids, for adults, whatever. I miss that. Because there are too many places where we don't ask people, do you want to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? We just assume. We can't assume anything. We need to make sure that people there, and especially kids, get it. 4% of those who accept Jesus Christ, 13 to 18 years old, by the time they reach 13 to 18, the statistics are that only 4% that are already not serving God will come to a relationship with God. 4%. 6% of individuals that are 19 and older. We're talking 19 until they die. So what does that mean? That means if we're going to reach them, we've got to be reaching children. We have to. You know what? I was telling somebody earlier, my thing is this. I used to, when I was in the church of 5,000, church 1,500, I did a lot of the stuff, but I was training other people. I've done lots of training for people to work with our kids. And my thing was always entertain the kids or they'll entertain you and you won't like their entertainment. Okay? Man, everything was planned out. It was there. We had peppy music playing. We had, open for business. You probably don't know what that is, but it was a blast. I enjoyed it. It was fun. This is what George Barna says. In other words, if people do not embrace Jesus Christ as their Savior before their teenage years, the chance of their doing so at all is slim. Not that it's not going to happen, but it's slim. That's George Barna's words. And if you're familiar with George Barna, he knows what he's talking about. He's done massive research. Proverbs 22:6 says this, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now, is that 100%? No, unfortunately it is not. But you know what? I still think that the writer of Proverbs knew what he was talking about. In fact, he was a pretty smart guy. If we take and we look at what does that verse mean? This is Barnes' notes. He says, the way he should go, or according to the tenor of his way, i.e. the path especially belonging to, especially fitted for that individual's character. The proverb enjoins the closest possible study of each child's temperament and the adaptation of his way of life to that. Now, this is actually what my PhD is in, okay? There are two factors that make us who we are. And this is what we've got to understand. First of all, our God-given temperament. Okay? We are all born with a God-given temperament. I do testing, APS. Pastor Jonathan can do it as well. APS testing that tells us what our God-given temperament is. And theoretically, throughout life, that temperament does not change. But what happens is we mix in there our life experience. So our life experience and our temperament come together. Now, in the area of inclusion, that means how I relate to people as a whole. Believe it or not, I am a melancholy compulsive. What does that mean? That means give me my Kindle, a good book to read, and I'd rather be in the woods reading. No offense to anybody here, but that's my preference. But I grew up as a preacher's kid, and since I can remember literally, third grade on, I've been in front of people all of my life. I was leading worship in sixth grade, sixth grade on Sunday night services in my dad's church. I've done ministry, worship, and children and youth and all kinds of things ever since I can remember, and I love it. But it wears me out. And that's what it does. So that life experience says, I love that interaction, but my temper says, but it costs me energy. Somebody that's on the other side of the scale, that sanguine, if they're not with people, that costs them energy. They want to be with people. They're crazy, though. They never plan anything out the way it should be. So that's another whole story. But anyway, so those two things, those are what interacts. So what do we get? Well, we got then the God-created temperament. When we are conceived, our unique temperament is placed within us by the order of God. And then the second thing, at birth, we begin interacting with our environment. Our environment interacts with us. This interaction slightly molds and alters our temperament, thereby forming our character. And then what we end up with is our personality. It's self-selected. It's expressed in the way that we perceive how we must behave to survive in the world in which we live. This may or may not be part of our temperament and our character. In other words, we all have personalities. Some people, multiple personalities. You go to work, you behave one way. You come home, you're a different way. When you're at church, you're a different way, whatever. And the goal, honestly, if at all possible, is to understand how God created us as unique individuals. And that's what we show people. I love being with people. But honestly, after yesterday doing 3 programs with kids and everything, I was wiped, okay? because it just costs me emotionally, but I still love doing it. I guarantee you I get done today, I'll be wiped. So there's a phrase called procrustianism. I love this. If you look it up, this word's derived from a Greek myth about a man who would invite people to his home to visit. They would sleep in the Procrustean bed, but there was one condition. They had to fit the bed perfectly. If they were too long, he'd cut off their legs. And if they were too short, he stretched them. Okay? So, marked by arbitrary, often ruthless disregard of individual differences or special circumstances. And here's the problem. What we try to do if we're not careful is we try to put everybody in a mold. So as parents, if I am a melancholy compulsive in various areas, then I think my kids should be just like me. Now, like I said, I ran a pastoral counseling clinic for many years in New London, Wisconsin. And I worked with this. I met with families and we'd do testing, we'd do all kinds of things. But it's very difficult to understand that not everybody's like me. And they don't need to be. In fact, the sanguines think if you're a melancholy compulsive, there's something wrong with you. You've got some mental disorders. It's like, no, that's how God made me. But see, we think the sanguines are crazy because they laugh and talk about anything and everything, whether it's funny or not. Okay? There's something wrong with them. No, that's how God made them. This is what Psalm says. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderfully. To distinguish, put a difference, show marvelous, separate, set apart. Okay? God made us all unique individuals. We have unique life experience that goes with that. As a counselor, again, I used to tell people, we need to quit beating up on everybody else. People that are doing stupid things and whatever else, and yeah, people do stupid things, sorry, if that, whatever. But we need to quit beating up on them, and instead we need to figure out why they're doing what they're doing and help them give that to God so they can change what they're doing. But if you beat up on your kids, it really doesn't do a bit of good. If you beat up on the people at work or whatever, it doesn't do any good. What you got to do is love them enough to care about helping them to do better. Problem is we got to get ourselves figured out before we can do that. But too often we're trying to do that with kids. We're trying to put them in a mold. And listen, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this if I get the time here. We'll see. I have a degree in elementary ed and a master's in education. I got a degree in biblical studies. I love learning things. Okay, it's not because I'm smart. I just like learning things. I am a licensed teacher in the state of Wisconsin. I've taught in 3 public schools. Okay, the problem is, quite honestly, in most classrooms, we try to put kids into this mold. You have to do this on the test, and you have to do that, and we're testing everybody, and we're teaching to the test. You've all heard that phrase before, I'm sure, okay? And we got kids that are different. Not every kid is going to college. Not every kid needs to be learning chemistry and physics and whatever else. When I was teaching my thing, and I did teach chemistry, and I did teach physics, I also taught middle school, I taught lots of different things, but what we really need to do is find out what is their passion and help them learn to fit that passion. That's a whole other thing. It's not in my notes. Sorry about that. That was a bonus. We need to understand that we all have unique temperaments and life experience that makes us who we are. We must not try to put our children in a box, but we must strive to understand who God made them to be. Man, if there's anything you take out of here today, that probably more than anything else is worth having. Okay? We're all unique. So who is responsible for children's faith formation? Again, George Barna. He says, church leaders from all stripes are in agreement when it comes to where the responsibility lies for a child's formation and development. Now, I don't know if you can read this very well, but here's a chart. Okay? Again, this is from Barna. And it shows that parents of these people rank parents number 1 as the primary influence on children. 99% would say yes. The church, number 2, 92%. Number 3, the Christian community outside the church. Number 4, the school. And number 5, the government and society. And I'm not saying these are all positive influences. I'm saying they are the influences. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? So they see the parents as the number 1 positive influence. We would describe these influences as positive, negative to the spiritual formation of the children. So he goes on to say this, says, walk the walk, don't just talk the talk. Ever since they are little, kids watch their parents like a hawk. They know when you are telling them to do as I say and not as I do. And they don't like it. Okay? We need to live it as parents. We need to make sure that we're doing the right things. Number 2, strive not to set a double standard for our children, but live by the same standards and rules you expect your kids to live by. When parents live godly lives, their children will follow or will be more likely to follow God because they will follow their parents' example. We need to be setting that example. I have I've said this to many, hundreds of people in counseling. Your relationship with your spouse typically is a reflection of your relationship with God. And your relationship with your children is a reflection of your relationship with your spouse. If you don't want your kids back-talking you, then you should not be back-talking your spouse or them. I used to tell this to teachers I worked with. They're upset because kids are being snarky or whatever, but they're doing it in their classroom to the kids. You can't do that. You want the kids to respect you, then you better respect them. And I'm going to be honest, in my classroom, I demanded absolute respect, but then I respected them too. Or I tried to the best I could, even when they were snarky. Okay? You've got to. Listen to your children. This takes more than just hearing and involves paying close attention and genuinely caring about what they have to say. If kids do not come to their parents for advice or support when they face difficult situations in life, there's usually a reason. Most likely it's because the parent is not a good listener. Yeah. Go to school. Consider what James 1:19 says. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to be angry. Often young people simply need to talk and express their frustrations, questions, or concerns. Solving their problems or jumping on their faults and mistakes simply adds more stress to the situation. When they are ready for advice, they will ask for it. Until then, show them that you care for them by listening. Am I perfect at this? No. Okay? I'm not saying any of us is perfect at it. But we need to understand that they're real issues. Realize that you must impact a lot of kids beyond, or that you do impact a lot of kids beyond your own. In a society where nearly half of marriages end in divorce, countless kids lack the godly parent or role model that they need. I love this picture. If you can see it there, the words you may not be able to see, but it says, your marriage is the gospel. You are preaching to your children. Number 2 influence is the church. So, the church's influence. George Barna again says this. He says, since I became a Christian 2 decades ago, I've always accepted the dominant notion that the most important ministry is that conducted among adults. Now remember, this is George Barna. He's done the research. This isn't me. He says, but the overwhelming evidence that we have seen of the huge impact in the lives of kids and relatively limited changes in the lives of adults has completely revolutionized my view of ministry. I have concluded that children are the single most important population group for the church to focus on. I have concluded that children are the single most important population group for the children to focus on. He goes on to say, but the overwhelming evidence that we have seen of the huge impact in the lives of kids and the relatively limited changes in the lives of adults has completely revolutionized my view of how important it really is to reach kids. I may not get through the whole thing today, and that's okay. I may have to come back and finish, but let me just say this. I can think of several situations in my life. My father before he went back into full-time ministry, he worked for General Electric in Bloomington, Illinois. And for 3 months, they sent he and our entire family to Phoenix, Arizona for training. And I remember we went and visited a church. It was a Church of God. I remember that. Big church. And I was between second and third grade, so I would have been all of 8, 9 years old maybe. And I remember them taking us to a separate building at the church where all the Sunday school classes were. And this person put me into a classroom. Nobody else was there and the lights weren't even on, but that was my classroom because that was my age group. And I sat in there for 45, 50 minutes, whatever it was, by myself in the dark. Because at 8 years old, I wasn't, I was a shy little kid, believe it or not. And I remember somebody coming at the end and the door was open and they looked in and said, "What are you sitting in here for?" I said, "Well, this is where they put me." And they said, "Oh, well, the teacher for your class wasn't here today. They're all in there with the other, whatever." Well, my parents at the end of church said, "So how did it go?" And I went, "Oh, it was in the class, whatever." We never went back. That church never got a second visit. No. Because my parents valued what was happening to their kids. I remember a church that we attended once in New London. And our daughter, who is now 17, would have been, I don't know, what would she been, 5 or 6? And she was downstairs in the children's church program and needed to go to the bathroom. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I was a children's pastor, I had some very strict guidelines that my people had to follow. A kid needs to go to the bathroom. If it's a boy, then a guy goes to the bathroom. The kid stands there. The guy goes in, looks around, makes sure nobody else is there, sends the boy in. He stands outside, waits for the kid to go to the bathroom and come back out. Okay? Kids don't go to the bathroom by themselves. If it's a lady, girl, it's the opposite. They send her to the bathroom. While she's in the bathroom, they all leave to go outside and play games. She comes back, and there's nobody in that room. We come downstairs at the end of church, and she's in there by herself bawling, and we're going, "What are you doing in here?" "I don't know where everybody's at." Okay? We never went back. They didn't get another chance. You know what? I'll hit this in a moment if I get to it. But statistically, what happens to your children in church affects whether you're going to go back or not for most families. Okay? Ministry. Aim lower, think smaller. I believe what we do, this is what in Ministry Magazine says, I believe what we do with children at church is the most important ministry thrust that we will ever undertake. Why? Because research indicates that the moral, spiritual, and relational foundations of people's lives are determined primarily by the age of 13. After that point, it can be very difficult to change those ideas. He goes on to say, it is strange to note that Christians seem to be the only ones who believe they should wait to influence children's minds. Advertisers do not wait. They get to work right away to capture those minds and shape their decisions. Look at how McDonald's has impacted children around the world in choosing fast foods over healthy foods. Do not press the pause button any longer. We need to take active steps to put children as the priority on our agenda. He goes on to say, if I can do it there we go. For years, church leaders have heard the claim that nearly 9 out of 10 Christians accept Jesus as their Savior before the age of 18. If that statistic was accurate in the past, it no longer depicts U.S. society. The current Barna study indicates of people who accept Christ. For years, this is what it says, church leaders have heard, he says this. He says 43% do so before reaching the age of 13. Now, I know we went over this, but it's important. 19% do so by the age of 17. 13% do so from the age of 18 to 21. 23% do so after the age of 21. This is how many come to Christ. The numbers before were the percentages that in that population come, but those that come to Christ, this is the ages that they do so. 58% of highly engaged Christian parents choose a church with their kids in mind. 58%. Now, we're going to go through this next part pretty fast here because I got to quit because you got a class here in just a little bit, okay? I don't want to get too long-winded. I don't want to bore you guys. Are we okay? Okay, because McDonald's will be open when we get done, I promise. Okay. The influence of schools, friends, peers, and society. And we looked at this kind of earlier, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but essentially, there's a lot of influence there, and it's not necessarily good influence. Schools are ranked alongside a child's friends and peers as primarily negative influences. In some cases, the perceived negative influence of a child, school, or friend group outweighs the perceived positive influence by double. The percentage of teens who are not only born again, but also believe in the accuracy of the Bible, personal responsibility to evangelize, believe in salvation for grace alone, and possess orthodox biblical views of God, Jesus, and Satan, have declined from 10% in 95 to just 4% today. This demise is attributable to the growing numbers of teenagers who accept moral relativism and pluralistic theology as their faith foundation. Public schools use values clarification and statistical ethics beginning at a very young age to indoctrinate our children. Guys, this is very real. Like I said, I taught in 3 different public schools, also a private school. You know what? I'm just one of those people, for what it's worth. I had to teach the theory of evolution. But when I got done, I said, but honestly, and this is true, current studies of genetics prove evolution is absolutely impossible. And that's what I'd tell my kids. And there are other theories that have much more credibility, and always the kids would raise their hand, well, Mr. Mohn, what are they? And I'd get to share with them. I had parents ticked off. They were not happy with me because I didn't teach relativism. I taught facts. And honestly, if you look at modern DNA studies prove that evolution could not have taken place. Adaptation can, but species cannot form other species. You look into it, okay? That's a whole nother sermon. Educators, according to Barna polling, nearly half of the nation's public educators are practicing Christians. So don't get me wrong, I'm not beating up on it. People who attend church at least monthly and say their faith is very important in their lives. Critics who claim faith has been removed from public schools seem to overlook the countless hours these teachers, counselors, administrators, and coaches devote to shaping students. But I'm going to tell you, it's becoming more and more and more difficult as a Christian to share Christian values in public schools. I know that for a fact. I taught for a couple of years on the island at the school there, smallest public school in the state of Wisconsin. That's why I got away with some of the things I was able to get away with. But truthfully, that's why I'm not teaching there anymore, because I ticked off the school counselor. Okay? That's a whole other story. Volunteers. Practicing Christians are more likely to volunteer for their local public school than are non-Christians. In fact, of those who regularly volunteer at public schools, 2/3, 65% attend church. Considering that practicing Christians constitute less than half of the national adult population, their significant involvement in education is statistically exceptional. Okay, it's good. Churches. Many churches in America provide support and volunteers for public schools. For example, almost half of the nation's churches offer support and networking for educators who attend their church. Okay, we're going to move on here. Positive influence of homeschooling. Yes, I believe there is a positive influence. For what it's worth, Lanita was homeschooled, okay? Our oldest son, 36, was homeschooled. We got one right now that we just pulled out, and she's going in the Air Force here soon. And we're finishing. We got another. It's a long story. But anyway, research facts on homeschooling says this. There are about 2.5 million homeschool students in grades K through 12 in the United States. That is, there were an estimated 2.5 million in the spring of 2019. It appears that the homeschool population is continuing to grow at an estimated 2% to 8% per annum over the past few years. Guys, this is not a little thing. This is huge. An estimated 3.4 million or more U.S. adults have been homeschooled for at least 1 year of their K through 12 years, and they were homeschooled on average of 6 to 8 years. If one adds to this number the 2.3 million being homeschooled today, an estimated 5.7 million Americans have experienced being homeschooled. Customize or individualize the curriculum. These are advantages, learning. Like I said, we don't have a lot of time, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but another advantage, we can accomplish more academically than in schools. We can teach them the things that they enjoy learning, they need to learn. Use of pedagogical approaches other than those typical in institutional schools. Enhance family relationships between children and parents and among siblings. I have to be honest, I think it's kind of sad when a teacher spends more time with my kid than I do. Okay? I'm working till 6 o'clock at night. I spend 5 minutes talking to my kid after school, and the teacher's been with them all day. Especially if they're not a Christian or they can't share Christian values. Provide guided and seasonal or reasoned social interactions with youthful peers and adults. Provide a safer environment for children and youth because of physical violence, drugs and alcohol, psychological abuse, racism, improper and unhealthy sexuality associated with institutional schools. And I'm going to tell you, even in the smallest school in the state of Wisconsin, we've had some issues with bullying and issues with lots of other things of that nature and sexual inappropriate things and whatever. Alcoholism on the island is rampant, even in the kids. It's sad. Teach and impart a particular set of values, beliefs, and worldviews to children and youth. Academic performance. Home educated typically score 15 to 30 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. You know, like I said, we got one daughter going in the Air Force here probably within a month or so, and they have absolutely no problems at all with her finishing homeschooled. None. She can go in the Air Force, not a problem. Okay? More and more, this is accepted. Homeschool students score above average on achievement tests regardless of their parents' level of formal education or their family's household income. Whether homeschooled parents were ever certified teachers is not related to their child's academic achievement. And the home educated typically score 15 to 30 percentile points above. I already said that, I think, didn't I? Yeah. Anyway. Okay. There we go. You can see them. Like I said, I apologize here. It's just, Pastor Jonathan's going to kick me off the platform in just a moment here. So they participate in local community service more frequently does the general population. They vote and attend public meetings more frequently than the general population. They go to and succeed at college at an equal or higher rate than the general population. Guys, there are values there. Now, does that mean everybody has to, needs to, whatever? Not necessarily. By adulthood, they internalize the values and beliefs of their parents at a high rate. Recent surveys results indicate that nearly 90% of churched homeschool students remain strong in the faith at a rate that far surpassed their churched counterparts who attended public or private school. Wow, that's a huge difference. This is our life motto. It's not words, it's actions. It comes from James 1:22. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. I actually, when I was on staff at the church in Alabama, we ran our own kids camps down there for our kids. And this was one of our camp mottos one year that we developed. And we're talking, 30 years ago, maybe not quite that, 25 years ago. And we said, this is our life motto from now on. It's not words, it's actions. We can't just talk about it. We've got to do it. And I would challenge you, as a church, you see the statistics, you see the numbers. We can't just talk about it. We've got to do it. Marshfield. Wow. How many kids do you think are in this community that are not in church anyplace? That are just waiting for somebody to care? Somebody to invite them. A place where they can come and go, wow, this is incredible. I was sharing with somebody, and then I'll shut up and we'll pray. But I was sharing with somebody yesterday. When I was at the church in California, we had a family that was supposed to leave on vacation on Saturday. And on Sunday, they show up for church. And I said, well, I thought you were leaving for vacation and expect you to be here. And they looked at me and they said, our kids begged us. They said, we can't leave until after church on Sunday because we've got to be in children's church. They couldn't wait to get there. I said, you know what? Probably the best compliment I've ever gotten in my life. Their kids begged their parents, and the parents said, that's fine. We'll put off our vacation for a day because you want to be in children's church. Wow. Father, we come to you right now. We thank you for your love and your goodness to us. I thank you. I thank you for godly parents that raised me in church. I thank you for an altar service that took place when I was 9 years old. And I made a commitment to serve you, and I have kept that commitment to the best of my ability and with your help to this day, until the day that I die. Father, I thank you for the kids that you have given us. No, we are not perfect parents. We never have been. We never will be. But Father, I thank you. I thank you for the kids that are here and the kids that will be here because of a church that cares about ministry to children, ministry to youth, ministry to adults. It's all valuable. It's all needed. But we've got to reach the kids so that we can mentor them as teens and keep them as adults. Father, I pray that you will just help us, that it will not just be words, but it'll be action. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. We've got to do it. So I pray, Lord, that if something I have said challenges anybody today, that they will say, wow, I have a passion to see this done. I thank you. I ask it in Jesus' name.